My name's Larissa Baldwin. I'm the National Co-Director of the SEED Indigenous Youth Climate Network.
Thank you. You will have to speak. Unfortunately, I know you're sharing a microphone, but you'll have to huddle and speak into the microphone. Okay. Otherwise, it doesn't get picked up, and the acoustics here are a bit echoey.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name's Nicole Hutton, and I'm a campaigner for SEED Indigenous Youth Climate Network.
Thank you.
My name is Jordan Wimbis, and I'm the Grassroots organiser for SEED Indigenous Climate Network.
Thank you. Yes, when you're ready.
Okay. So, just like to take the opportunity for thanking the panel for allowing us to speak today. We are the SEED Indigenous Youth Climate Network. We're a national network of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people right across the country. We have volunteers. We have hundreds of volunteers across the country. We're a representational network. We have volunteers up here in the Territory, right through the Gulf, Top End, Central, and basically, we're here to share our experience of what we've been doing over the last 2 years, particularly around fracking in the Northern Territory, but also respond to some of the recommendations in the report. Just want to say that we're not scientists, obviously. It is a really comprehensive report that we struggled to work out what some of it meant, but we're just going to give our best go at responding to what we've got from communities and the information that we gathered. Yeah, so I guess to start off with, we're a climate organisation, and for us, the reason for working in the Territory was knew the footprint of the proposed fracking. And for us, I know that the inquiry has said that the increase and talked about the risk levels and that but for us, we really believe that this is going to blow our carbon budget, and we do believe that we should be leaving all new fossil fuels in the ground. When you look at just the emissions to come from the Beetaloo Basin, in terms of where Australia needs to be in terms of taking responsibility, we really believe that we can't be opening up the Beetaloo Basin, and we know that that's just one of the basins that frackers are looking to getting gas from. For us, I guess, and when we read the report from the inquiry, I'm not sure if it touches on really the human impacts of climate change. For us, living in remote communities and families living in remote communities, when it gets too hot and we deal with an increase of temperature, people die. People get cut off when we have extreme weather events. You might have seen this year in communities across the Territory that not only did people get cut off from water and because over the last 2 years we've had unprecedented wet seasons, in some communities they weren't even able to access money on their basics card. And so it meant they weren't able to buy power cards, they weren't able to buy food. You know, if our wet seasons are going to keep changing and keep getting longer, we seen last year places in Borroloola got cut off from the health services because they were on the other side of the river. Climate change does impact people first, Aboriginal people first and worst. Even the CSIRO says that in Australia it will impact Indigenous communities because of where we live. And we know that methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. And so what we ideally would have wanted to see, and we know that this is a scientific report, but there is a human cost to climate change that our communities will bear the brunt of. Yeah.
Awesome. I just wanted to introduce myself further. I'm a Guttural woman from just outside of Borroloola. My mum grew up on Creswell Downs Station, which I don't think it's called that anymore, and my dad grew up on Malipanya Springs Station, and that was also my first home. So I'm going to talk about a survey that we did in Borroloola, which we have a PowerPoint. Cool. So the survey that we did in Borroloola was a community-led consultation, and it was 6 months process from start to finish, and that includes consulting the community on how they wanted the survey to be done, to finally presenting the results of the survey to the community and also to Parliament. So it was an information gathering survey. The questions that we asked were directly in line with the terms of reference. So that means that we asked everyone in the community about all of the different points of the terms of reference and asked them how that concerned them. And we also, all of the materials that we used within the survey were presented from the panel, the inquiry. But the only materials that we didn't use were simply photographs used as evidence from overseas of evidence where this has been done before. So yeah, basically the reason that we did the community survey was because we wanted to raise awareness within the community on fracking and what was going to happen in the community, and also the community was requested by the consultation because they wanted to make sure that the inquiry, the gas companies and the government to know their stance on fracking. So yeah, where did the survey cover? So we met with the community and asked where they thought that the survey should cover, where we should go, and we spent a few months going out to Borroloola town camps, outstations, Robinson River, surrounding towns and communities. So we really believe that we went to and we covered as much of the community as possible. Oh, sorry, it's written up there. Awesome. So we believe that the survey set up community engagement. It was a community-led survey, and it started a conversation with community members. So we brought like a bunch of young mob from the community along, like with us who were doing the survey, and they had a lot of input in how the survey was run and how everything went and who we spoke to. And therefore, like, they were able to make sure that the community was being understood of what the questions were, and we understood the answers that the community members gave us. So after the survey, the community was really excited to team up with other communities, and then we suggested that we could help them put on an Aboriginal fracking forum, which then brought the surrounding communities of the Beetaloo Basin together in Darwin. And yeah, and it was also created a chain reaction amongst the surrounding communities. So we've also spoken to other surrounding communities about also putting on a survey that was similar to what we did. Awesome. And then the results of that survey was 96.88% of residents want a ban on fracking in the Northern Territory. We worked with community members to design a sign to declare the community gas field free. So that meant we had a community meeting. We also have some pictures here of what we wanted to do, but we had a community meeting with people to see how they wanted to present those results. So people decided that they wanted to put a sign up in the community, and they also wanted to all get on a bus and travel up to Darwin to present it to Parliament. So after that, we delivered it to Jerry McCarthy in a meeting in Darwin. And you'll see a photo of all the Borroloola mob that travelled up to Darwin. And another finding that we found was that most concerns for the community members were around contaminated water, health, future generations, and culture. And that's also noting that in Borroloola right now there is already concerns around water contamination from the MacArthur River mine. Anything like that? Nope.
Do you want to go through, play the video?
Awesome. And then after we did the survey, we held the Aboriginal Fracking Forum, which I mentioned before, and after that the communities put together a statement to the inquiry, which we've got a video of. Yeah, be able to play that video, please? Jordan will now hand out the statement and also pictures from the presentation of the statement at Parliament.
We have come together to take stand against fracking, and we say no. We don't want fracking on our country. We are concerned about fracking on our country. The damage to our water, our country, our dreaming, and our sunlight. This damage will be irreversible.
We don't want to see our rivers and waters poisoned We want to be able to fish, hunt, gather bush tucker and bush medicines, now and for all generations of people to come. We have been told lies by gas companies telling us there will be no impact, that there will be 1 or 2 frack wells, not a gas field with hundreds or even thousands of wells.
Other states in Australia have banned fracking, and so many nations around the world, because it's so risky. We refuse to be lied to anymore. We know that fracking will bring chemicals that will contaminate our water and damage our health. Drilling in one area has a bigger impact than just that place. It will damage neighbouring language groups on country and the entire water system. We want our water to be clean and healthy for all of us.
People and country are one and the same. Any damage to our country impacts us, our identity and who we are. We will not be divided by others who do not understand our law of other land. We will stand strong and stand together. We will do what it takes to see a permanent ban on fracking. There will be no sacrifice zone.
We represent a group of Aboriginal people coming here together to stop fracking and protect our country. We call on this government to hear it and to take action. We stand together and we will do whatever must be to protect our country. Country for generations, for our children, because water, and with that water, clean water, no one of us can survive. We are here, and we are not going away until you hear us.
Thank you.
I just also wanted to point out that the person in the blue dress in the background was Selena Yubo that came down to accept the submission. And then it was also later read in anti-parliament by the member from Nhulunbuy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So the way the Aboriginal Fracking Forum came about was before there was delay into the report, people were really worried that this was just going to be, I'm sure the panel will be aware that there are many reports and consultations that come through Aboriginal communities, and sometimes those recommendations are not taken seriously by government. And so we had done the survey with Borroloola, and then we had also been invited to Kudich Karali, which was held in Elliot. It was a gathering of traditional owners from across the Beetaloo basins, or the songlines that are in that basin. And basically they came together, and it was actually an opportunity of just speaking to each other and talking about what people are saying, and the fact that water is connected and Aboriginal communities in the territory are also connected. So after Kudich Karali, basically what they wanted to do was show to the NT government that regardless, because at that time we're unsure about what was going to come out of the inquiry, and they wanted to show the government and the gas companies that there is actually a really united, strong and big movement of Aboriginal people and communities who are saying no and really concerned about the impacts of fracking. So SEED played a role in, we fundraised to bring people together from a lot of remote communities. People came as far as Yendamu, like from many different communities, and we can give you information of where people came from. We paid for them to come together. We fundraised for that online through social media. We did a crowdfunder, and that's how we raised the money to bring them together. We did things like booked meetings with the politicians, and from the meeting that we had together in the space that when they met, they said that they wanted to create a statement and read it to the media and to the government. So SEED took a role in, we basically contacted a lot of the media organisations and also the government, and they sent down Selena to meet and to accept the statement on their behalf.
Yeah. So basically, we just wanted to present that to you because we feel that the overwhelming community opposition to fracking has not been accurately represented in the report. We believe, like being on the ground and speaking to communities, especially communities in the Beetaloo Basin, that there is very little community support for fracking, and that that the strong opposition wasn't entirely written about in the report.
Yep. And so over the last 2 years, SEED has done over 62 community visits. We go into some communities for up to periods of 10 days. And our job there is, what we see as our job is just to talk to people and hear what their response is and how they feel about fracking. We've had thousands of conversations over the last 2 years, so we feel like we have met communities where people have been, where we have seen people support fracking. I think the other part of that response is that they often are really unsure about what the process is, and they still have a lot of concerns about water. But obviously there are communities, or there have been people that we have spoken to that have said, like, maybe there will be jobs from it, and we understand the economic situation of the Northern Territory. But overwhelmingly, through the thousands of conversations that we've had, most people have said that they want to see a ban on fracking, and they're really worried about the impacts on country and on water. Oh, sorry. So we also want to talk to you a bit about, you might have heard through your travels through the NT that there was a group of First Nations people from Turtle Island, so what we call the US and Canada, that came over last year to meet with a bunch of communities that were frontline. SEED received an invitation to go to Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, which is the home of the Hidatsa, Mandan and Arikara nations. Their Indian reservation is home to the Buck and Shale fields. And so when they came over to the Northern Territory, they really wanted to show us the footprint of a shale industry because it doesn't exist here. So we went over to the, Nicole and I went over to North Dakota just recently in Froze. It was very cold over there. But I guess it was a really eye-opening opportunity to see the industry and have a look at how that could be interpreted here in the Territory. I just want to make mention that in the Buck and Shale fields, they are there predominantly looking for oil, and that's what the companies are there trying to extract. With the shale gas, they flare the shale gas, which has to come out first. They flare that 24/7, 365 days a year, and they've been doing that fracking process for the last 10 years. So while the companies are not looking for the same thing, there are some places now where they're trying to capture the gas. They've set up processing. Predominantly they're looking for the shale oil. But in terms of looking at the footprint of a shale field, it was really eye-opening to us in terms of knowing that, and also they have like 13,000 wells over there, and they have, Jordan's going to hand you out a bunch of stuff that was handed to us, and we'll explain what it is. They have 13,000 active wells on their reservation, and they also have a 98% success rate of hitting mineral. So they have a really huge industry of like, so when they drill, 98% of wells have, they can extract oil from and gas. For us, I think the biggest takeaway for us was actually the footprint of the industry. We heard stories about, over the last 10 years since they've moved to hydraulic fracturing, that the increase of trucks on the road in a small community that's probably around the size of Borroloola in terms of the township, but the land area is much bigger. Over the last 10 years, they had 46 members of their community die in collisions with trucks. And that is something that they are constantly dealing with, and are dealing with that constantly being in a state of what we would call sorry business. It has a huge impact on their community. Also, the footprint of the industry, just seeing that you actually can't, shale gas wells are drilled where they can extract oil, and just like we could see a shale gas, the rig here, and then literally houses 200 metres away. So it's just like there was popped up all over the landscape. And thinking about somewhere like the Territory, like how do you determine where these wells are going to be drilled? And this is also something that we've heard from communities like talking about they're worried about it being drilled around cultural sites and sacred sites and that sort of thing. One of the things that we heard from the people over there was in terms of finding areas of cultural significance and there being drilling next to it, they have had no end to the fight of trying to stop frackers to stop fracking while they can try and get the ledger, use the EPA and the different Department of Indian Affairs and that sort of stuff to get the drilling and the fracking to stop when they've identified a culturally significant space, which is, for us, with the gas companies saying that they can do that process and do that cultural, heritage looking where they're going to go and put drilling rigs and that sort of stuff in the process, and to knowing that another First Nations community has experienced a lot of turmoil in trying to get fracking companies to stop business when they've hit culturally significant sites, and the fact that in some cases they weren't able to do anything about it. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the scale of fracking. Like, coming in on the plane, it was there was nowhere that there wasn't fracking. It was evenly spread over the entire landscape, and that's something that really concerns me about seeing that happen here. And they also did comment about how when fracking came in, it was coming in meant to be small areas, but then eventually it was spread to the scale that it's at now. And that really concerns me, as that's something that has been proposed as a possibility, that it's put to a small area. But yeah, seeing what's happened over there makes me concerned.
So also just want to, when we went to Fort Berthold, we met with a citizen action group called Power. So the Power is Protectors of Water and Earth Rights. They're a citizen action group, and basically they were set up because they were concerned about the impact of, basically there was been an increase of respiratory illness and also cancers in their community, coupled with all the deaths that they'd had from the on roads and that sort of thing. So they've done a bunch of research. Two of the people that are leading that organisation are scientists, and they have their own university on Fort Berthold, and so they basically gave us this information to give to the inquiry. There's a map that they put together, which is actually the footprint of the industry, and then there's some information about brine spills, which is frack water spills that they have had hundreds of. So they gave us a whole bunch of information to not only give to the inquiry, but also to give to other communities that we've been working with. And so that's what you've got in front of you now. I just want to say that it was incredible to meet with Power and the amount of work that they do, and living in and dealing with the really low level of protection that they have through the US EPA laws. But one thing that really stood out to me is that the burden of proof is so high on communities. And when I met with these people, incredible scientists, incredible First Nations people, one thing that really stood out to me was, like, how would you have Aboriginal communities trying to find this amount of information to have to prove that something has gone wrong? And they had a lot of, they talked to us a lot about the stories of, the burden of proof and how much stress that causes their community, and just what it's like to live in a shale field. And, this is an Indian reservation where they've had the oil industry there for the last 60 years. They've only started fracking in the last 10 years. But it's night and day, the impact that fracking has had on that community. And to think about our smaller, more remote communities with less services trying to deal with issues around fracking, I guess it just put home to me that there's a lot of scientific inquiries and baseline studies that the inquiry has suggested that be done, and I really think that needs to be done and not left with it to our communities to hold that burden.
And while we were over there, we spoke to a lot of people about the health issues that they've seen in their communities, and there are families that have been seeing higher rates of cancers than what should be normally expected, like most people in their family getting cancer, and then them thinking that maybe this is normal until they do some more research and find out that it's not normal. And there are also members of the community that are getting the same illnesses that fracking workers are getting. That's just from living in the community. And also myself, Larissa, and the other person that came over with us, we were there after 2 days, we had all received illnesses ourselves from like in our chest and our throat with our breathing, and there's no denying that that had impact from the fracking. What else? So the photo that you have in front of you, I just wanted to show you. When we went over there, I have to say that, so this photo is basically of wastewater fluid from fracking, and you can't see it because there's no way that we could take a full photo of it. But there are literally thousands of containers with waste frack fluids in it. What we were told by the community, and we can't verify this, is that the person that was working on that site had passed away recently. And obviously we're not scientists, we can't say that that's because of the chemicals or the work area that they're around. But I can say that everyone that we talked to knew about this, and the amount of people were really scared that was because whatever was in those containers had killed this person. We can't verify that, but at the same time, we can talk to how distressed it made the community. Everyone that we talked to talked about it. There were houses 100 metres away from these thousands of containers of waste fluid. People saying that, especially when we talked to Power, they had said that there had been some issues with wastewater coming up that they had found had to be radioactive. And so people who were living close to this were like, is this fluid radioactive? But also the thing about that is because that person had died, there's some legal, something that happened with the company going bust, and the company was responsible for cleaning and moving that fluid. The community now have no idea where they've gone or what's going to happen with it, and the government are not responsible for it. So I think while we can't verify that, what we can say is that when it's left to companies to clean up and deal with the issues and the spills or the community anxiety, we know that we have the same sort of thing happening here. We know firsthand the experience of what's been happening along with MacArthur River with the poisoning there. And stress, this causes real stress on communities. And so I just wanted to show you that because I know that there is no plan for the wastewater. You've talked about maybe putting it in tanks. Well, these are in tanks, but also I know that some of the gas companies have said to the inquiry they don't want to do that. So I think it's really important that we have a strategy for wastewater in place before anything goes ahead. Also, the brine spills on the road, because of the increased amount of traffic, they said that basically they've had hundreds of brine spills, and there's a study that Power had put together around the contamination and the types of minerals and poisons that they found in the soils, but the community has had to do that work themselves. So I guess the next thing I want to address is the social licence. I know that you guys did, the inquiry redid the social impacts report, and we had heard from communities about how the first lot of consultation went. We're really thankful that the inquiry has done that again. Throughout the inquiry report, we read a whole lot of your evidence around how increased risks of road accidents from construction, basically increased levels of anxiety and that sort of stuff for residents, and the different evidence that you had got from communities. And I think your recommendation at the end of it was like, if you basically done the bunch of recommendations from what you put forward, that you would be able to achieve social licence. And we're not, obviously, I guess, if you're like, do an awareness campaign, a compensation, that sort of stuff, this is the way that we've read it, that basically you'd be able to get informed consent. From our working with communities across the territory, we don't think a lot of communities that we work in, you would be able to achieve informed consent, or basically all the communities that we're working with are calling for a ban. They don't want to see this industry go ahead on their land and put risk to their water. I think we've said that. Sorry, just making sure we've said everything. Yeah, I think the other thing that through the process of saying that whether or not fracking goes ahead, we really feel like that a lot of the science and a lot of the testing that like baseline water studies needs to be done before and not by the industry. Also,
from our trip to North Dakota and like a lot of the conversations we've been having here, we really think that any cultural clearance needs to be done well ahead of any approvals. And we know how much work the inquiry has put into this report. We would really like to see the recommendations implemented. We don't want to see the government treat this like another report. We know that communities have put a lot of work into meeting the inquiry. We have driven thousands of kilometres to bring people to meetings, and we would really like the government to take this report seriously. I don't think we have anything else to add. That's it? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much for yet another powerful presentation. With the Barlula survey, is it possible to get hold of the questions you asked and the answers, or at least the percentage of the answers? I think that would be quite informative to us.
We just didn't have it on this computer,
okay.
So we couldn't print it today.
Yeah, great. If you could send that through to the task force, that would be fantastic. And just, I hear what you say about the social license chapter. I do, and you're certainly not necessarily, you're not the first presenters to have said that. And we will look at that again. I'm not sure we went so far as to say, oh, look, if all these steps are undertaken, then, hey, presto, there's going to be a social license to operate.
Yep.
Far from it. I mean, you know, most of those steps revolve around trust between communities and government, trust between communities and gas companies, and that's something that has to be earned, and that's earned over a long process of time. And as you've rightly pointed out, there's a very long history, I think, of why that trust is, everybody tells us, non-existent at the moment. All manner of legacy lines, you know, in and around Barlula and elsewhere in the Northern Territory. So,
and absolutely, if that is our interpretation, like, we don't deal with big documents like the reports and that sort of stuff, so that if our interpretation is wrong, we fully take that on.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think your interpretation is as I said, I'm not saying that at all. And if it was presented that way, then I think we have to go back and have a look at that. And there are a few places in the report that we have to go back and have a look at sort of the way that the information is presented and what we've said, and better reflect the views of community. We absolutely accept that. You did say that you felt that the views of the community weren't accepted enough, or that there wasn't a strong enough statement of opposition. You're right, it's not in the actual large document itself, but it is in the executive summary. What would you like to see in the draft, like the final, in the final report, obviously, rather than an executive summary? What would you like to see?
I think for me personally, again, that's the only way I can answer it, is I felt like the way that it read to me was it very much like homogenised views of Aboriginal people, and I know that there are like the vast majority of people don't want this, and I don't think that's reflected strongly to me, and like this is my personal opinion. But also I feel like where communities really are on the front line, I think it needs to make mention of like who is saying no to it, and that's the type of thing that I would like to see in there more, which is just like the communities who are, you know, if fracking goes ahead, they're the ones that are going to face the drilling rigs, and I feel like their opinions are the most important, and that there's room to capture those stories and those opinions.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Jones.
Ms. Baldwin, having had first-hand experience in the North Dakota area, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about that experience. In our report, we agree, we concur that spills are perhaps a really big risk factor, the biggest risk factor in this industry. They're guaranteed to occur, and so they're really important. But spills can occur on the well pad, where perhaps you can have fairly rigorous management procedures. But what was your feeling from talking to the people over there? Did they have a feeling that quite a few of these spills happen as a result of road accidents or dumping stuff where it shouldn't be dumped? Or what was the case? It
was a combination of a lot of things. So definitely road accidents. Because they had contractors who are responsible for trucking around the wastewater, they had trucks dumping water and then not knowing which company that truck had come from, and then like trying to talk to the truck drivers, and they were super hostile.
Sorry, and there was also, we were also told that the fines for dumping was less than the actual paying to dump the actual water.
Yes, well, the penalty has to be worse than the
and so that's
dumping it off the side, yes.
That's a huge issue, that it's actually cheaper for them to get the fine. Also, so we went to this, on the reservation there's the largest man-made lake in the US, which is Lake Sakakawea, and they had a drilling rig set up, and in order to stop the flaring contamination going into the water, to ease community, I guess, being worried about it, they put up a retaining wall that went halfway, like, so the flare was like another retaining wall higher than this thing, and it was like right, because they were fracking right next to the river. And so it's like stuff like that where it's just proximity to water and that sort of stuff as well, and then the waste spills and that sort of thing. But it was crazy to see like a wall that's like 20 metres high, 50 metres away from their river, with a half a containing wall around it. So like you could completely see the rig from the other side of the road, but not on the side of the...
I'd say lower than...
Yeah, it was like lower than that, and then the massive rig and the flare.
Well, certainly in the US, the average distance, setback distance of wells from habitation and so on is about 94 metres, and we clearly accept that that's not on, and in fact we've recommended at least 1 kilometre away from water bores and 1.6 kilometres from things like flares.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we reflected on while we were over there as well is like how Aboriginal people use their land. So even though you can set it back from certain, housing and different stuff, like going out on country, doing ceremony, walking songlines, like how is that going to be accounted for when you're putting a drilling rig or a flare, and how often people are going to come in contact with that? It just seems like an impossibility of like how you regulate that.
And another thing with the water spills is we were also told stories of community members filming trucks actually just letting the water out while they drive along the road, which is...
Just asking you a question about your photograph here. Was this a kind of a dump for wastewater, or like a tank farm that was just sitting there in the landscape? Was there a water treatment plant here, or was it just a dump?
So it had thousands. It had thousands of like those cylinders, but also containers as well, like humongous trucking containers, just sitting there. And it was literally in the middle of a housing estate. And this is where we told you the story about the person who looked after that site has passed away. And so it's created a huge amount of anxiety in the community around there.
I also want to note you can also see the water tank for the community in the background.
I was wondering what that was. It looked like an air traffic control tower, but it was a water tank.
Yeah, that's where they get their water from. And so, like, when we went to North Dakota to the reservation, people don't drink the water there. And just thinking about in Catherine with the whole PFAS thing and getting water delivered, and just like, how do you deal with that anxiety of people like not knowing if water is safe to drink, and like trucking a volume of water to a remote community if something happens?
Because like the water there is like presented as safe, and at restaurants they serve it, but the community have anxiety about drinking the water, so they actually personally go and buy bottled water, majority of citizens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
A question for Ms. Hutton, and it's a specific one first about the Borroloola survey, but then a more general question. And I'm just interested about the information that the Borroloola people use to make their assessments, and particularly that fracking is technically so complex, as we all know, and probably the most complex part relates to people's major concern about water contamination. And so I just got a specific question about what was the information that Borroloola people used to make their assessments, and then a broader question about, given that the issues are so complex technically, how well informed do you think Aboriginal communities in general are about the fracking issues?
So we used the information that we'd received from the inquiry, so the plain English part. So we talked people through that, and we also there were First Nation people that came over from Turtle Island, actually did visit members from that community, and explained a lot about what we just explained to you as well. Do you want to comment as well?
I think to comment on like how informed, not informed enough. Some of the people we talked to is the first time they've heard about fracking, but the first time they've ever had it explained to them. Yeah, so, and that's usual because even though the inquiry I know has visited Borroloola and places like that a lot, people live on homes, on outstations and that sort of stuff, so they don't see that level of information. And the government doesn't take the information, the gas companies doesn't take the information to people, whereas we had young people from Borroloola going out into their own community, so yeah.
And then just a follow-up, do you have any recommendations to us about what would be the best way, the most effective way of informing Aboriginal communities?
I think you just have to meet people and talk to them and explain the process of what's happening. And I think we've said that from basically when we've met with the inquiry before, is that the information that is used, like we didn't have any better information than the inquiry's plain English version of stuff to show people. And diagrams and that sort of stuff. We had gas companies coming out, we knew through the stories that we've been told for people that, you know, they didn't have translators, they didn't have diagrams, and it's an incredibly complex thing to explain. And also, like, I feel you have to want to explain it to people as well. And I think that young people in their communities really had an agenda about wanting their old people to understand what was happening, whereas a gas company just wants someone to sign something and they don't really care about how many people understand what is going on.
I also want to add that I don't think that holding one meeting in the middle of town and putting some posters up is enough to engage the entire of the community, because not everyone is seeing and hearing about these meetings that are happening. I think us being on the ground and going out door to door and knocking on every house more than one time was the best way that we could reach majority of the community.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I know there's got to be a direct correlation to the number of people who turned up to our meetings and your activity on the ground. And when you were not able to do that, then we certainly noticed the difference in the numbers. Yes. Anyone else from the side of the table? Okay. Yes, Dr. Beck.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments regarding human health. We, as a panel, take the issue of climate change science very seriously, the issue of global warming, and we will certainly be having something more to say in relation to the health effects from climate change in the report, so that is duly noted and it aligns with other comments as well too. So thank you for that observation. Just another question. From your visit to North Dakota and your discussions with the Indian communities there, did they give you any insight as to how they might exercise greater control over development in their lands in the future? Do they provide some insights that would be useful learnings for both you and for us?
I think that one of the sad things was to hear from them personally how much their laws are being weakened at the moment, and what they do is just literally investigate everything. And whenever there's a hearing coming to North Dakota, or whenever there's any politician coming to North Dakota, they get together, put together all of their stuff and go make submissions, go to inquiries and that sort of stuff. That's all they can do right now. They're trying really hard, but obviously the political climate in the US is really hard for them to deal with, especially when the current president is currently trying to increase production in North Dakota. One of the really big takeaways that they had, and that when we had Candy, she came over here and she met with people. Yeah, she said that, and when we were there, a lot of the old people, they were like, if they had an opportunity to say no and not sign the deal to fracking, they wouldn't have signed it because they didn't know the information to say yes to it, and they wouldn't be dealing with the impacts that they are now. But they're still doing incredible work, and a lot of the work that they're doing is actually just bringing their community together and working with their own community, because they're dealing with multi-billion-dollar companies and a government that wants to, have this oil and have this gas. So, yeah, a lot of the stuff that they're doing is more around engaging with their own communities and making sure that even if it's just them hearing the concerns around their air quality and that sort of stuff, that their community is engaged in the discussion.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Hart.
You made the comment that there's a need for further information on wastewater management strategy. Did you have any specific? I presume you're talking about the Beetaloo, the fields that are suggested at the moment. If government lifts a moratorium, they'd go ahead first. Do you have any specific thoughts about what you think is needed?
Well, I think it's crazy if fracking goes ahead, but how you deal with like the recharge of basins and the amount of water that is on, like it is, for most part of the year there's no water, but then for the rest of it is water everywhere. Like how one of the elders that came from down in Yendamu said, you can't tell contaminated water where to flow. And I think it's like how you actually, deal with the level of water that's coming out of these ponds, but also, like, where are you going to put it? And I actually don't have any suggestions, because from what I can understand, it's a lot of water. And that's one of the things that I got from North Dakota, is actually just seeing, like, when I first read the suggestion that you could put it in tanks, I was like, maybe that is a solution. And then I seen the tanks and I was like, where are you going to put these tanks? Like, they have to go somewhere. And we know how much anxiety there already exists in the Northern Territory about waste facilities around, like, different types of chemicals and that sort of stuff. And then, like, I don't know, like, when Power told us that they had done testing, or there had been testing done, and some stuff that had come back through the EPA to show that some of that wastewater had now had radioactive chemicals in it. It's just like, how do you do this? I don't understand, but yeah.
Can I also comment? I also saw the ponds that have been suggested that could happen here, and there is no way that the ponds replicating the ponds that they have over in North Dakota could work here, especially for wet season. They're very low in the ground, and there's nowhere for the water to overrun. It just runs straight into the soil if it was to flood.
Look, thanks for that. I think you put your finger on something. We've got quite a lot to say about wastewater, reuse, things like that. But what we haven't done is talk about what's the strategy for. Finally, there's going to be too much. Do you need a treatment plant? Is it a treatment plant that services the 3 companies? How's it constructed? All of those things. I think we've got a bit more to do in the final report.
Yeah,
on that
and I
one.
think I guess it's not, I don't know if it's a recommendation or not, but we just really feel like you need to answer that question before you can say yes to this industry. And people need to know and hear about what the plan is for wastewater, because there's a lot of anxiety about it.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Smith.
I just wanted to pursue a little further a comment that you made about your North Dakota trip, in part because I've been doing some of my own research into via contacts that I have in the US EPA about regulatory oversight. And my understanding is that even state regulators have difficulty enforcing regulation within reservation land, and the US EPA has even less power than them because of the way reservations are set up as states within states. But you indicated that the First Nations people were wanting further support from the US EPA, and I wondered whether that, in your opinion, that sort of federal support to the Northern Territory would be an important component of regulation here if the moratorium was lifted, knowing the comments that we've had many times about the inability to regulate in the NT.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the federal government has a really big part to play, and I feel like at the moment they just want fracking to go ahead, and they don't really care about any of the science. When you look at, I don't really have anything else to compare it to, but when you look at the scale of the pollution in the MacArthur River mine and the pollution in Catherine, the Northern Territory government doesn't have the resources to hold those companies to account. It doesn't have the resources to fix that situation. So the federal government does need to step in here. And I think another reason why the federal government is responsible is because of the amount. Something like 80% of Aboriginal people within the territory live in remote to very remote communities. And if there's nobody holding the Northern Territory government to account, then we live with contamination, do you know what I mean? Or nothing gets done to fix things. We live in the housing that we know needs to be fixed up, like all this sort of stuff, unless the federal government has to be held accountable to it. So I think they have a big role to play. And this is a territory, so they are responsible in a way as well.
Okay, thanks for expanding on that. That's very useful.
Any further questions? Thank you again for your presentation, and can I just, on behalf of the panel, thank SEED for all their presentations to date. You've always presented in a well-prepared, diligent, and most importantly, honest fashion. It speaks a great deal to your organisation as to the credit of your organisation as to the manner in which you have chosen to interact with the inquiry. We're very grateful for it. The reports and the final report will be much greatly strengthened as a result of your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.